at you with another exciting video. Now, Hannah Payne took matters in her own hands when Mr. Kenneth did a hit and run, allegedly, right? According to her, he drove away from the scene. Now, what she did is she pulled a George Zimmerman. She continued to follow Mr. Kenneth, even though she was told to stand down. That was a matter for the police and not Hannah Payne. But in her vigilante mindset, what she ended up doing was she ended up taking Mr. Kenneth's life. So we're going to go ahead and talk about what originally happened. And tonight, I'm going to actually post the whole interrogation. I'm going to post that whole interrogation on this channel later on tonight. But now, let's go ahead and dive into this video and this showcase what actually happened that night. And then we're going to talk about the actual verdict that was came out today. So let's go ahead and get this going.
Court calls for a preliminary hearing in the case of State of Georgia versus Hannah Payne, charged in arrest warrant 2019 CW 52032 with the offense of murder without malice. The defendant is present, represented by Attorney Matthew A. Tucker. The state is represented by District Attorney Tracy Graham Lawson. This is Judge West presiding. Ms. Lawson, you may proceed.
Thank you, Judge. Raise your right hand. Solemnly swear or affirm the evidence you're about to give this court in the case of the State of Georgia versus Hannah Payne will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Yes, ma'am.
Make sure you pull the mic up and state your name and occupation.
Good morning, I'm Detective Keon Hayward with Clayton County Police Department.
And to what unit are you assigned?
Major felonies,
And those include what?
homicides, armed robberies, home invasions, major crimes.
And how long have you worked for our police department?
5 years.
So on May 7th of 2019, did you have cause to have assigned you a case involving Hannah Payne?
Correct.
And approximately 6 o'clock on that particular evening, did an incident occur at Clark Howell Highway and Forest Parkway?
Correct.
And please explain to Judge West what had occurred at that intersection.
At that intersection, a hit and run or an accident occurred where a 2002 red Dodge Dakota ran a red light, struck a semi truck. And at that particular intersection, the defendant, Mrs. Payne, witnessed that.
Okay, I'll keep asking you questions. Okay, so an accident occurred, and who was driving the Dakota truck?
The victim, Kenneth Herring.
Mr. Herring.
Yes.
All right, and there was somebody else driving the semi-truck.
Correct.
And how was Miss Payne involved, if at all?
She witnessed the incident. She was also stopped at that intersection where the victim ran the red light.
And what kind of vehicle was Miss Payne driving?
She was driving a black and colored Jeep Cherokee.
So
Jeep.
did Mr. Herring stop at that scene?
Yes.
For approximately how long?
Approximately 20 minutes, 15 to 20 minutes.
And was there another individual that witnessed the accident that has a law enforcement background?
Correct.
And what was that individual's name, if you remember?
Mr. Robertson.
And what is his actual profession currently?
His name is Terry Robinson. He's a state corrections officer.
And does he have any kind of special training that was relevant at this incident regarding Mr. Herring?
Yes, he works in the infirmary at one of our state prisons here in the local area.
So he's medical training.
Correct.
And was he able to speak to Mr. Herring?
Yes.
And what did he smell any odor of alcohol about him?
No.
And what did he think was, based upon his training as a medic, what did he feel was occurring with Mr. Herring?
He believed that Mr. Herring was having a medical emergency.
And what was his opinion as to what the medical emergency was?
Probably in a diabetic shock or something consistent in that nature.
And it was based upon what symptoms that he observed?
He observed Mr. Herring to have red to orange eyes. He observed Mr. Herring walk around his truck several times. He was disoriented. He was asking what happened, who hit me, what's going on, and that's how he explained Mr. Herring.
And police were called to the scene.
Correct.
And sometime after 15 to 20 minutes, what occurred with Mr. Herring?
Due to the fact that Mr. Herring was not appearing to be in good health, Mr. Robertson asked him to sit down in his truck, and then Mr. Herring cranked up his truck, grabbed the engine several times, and drove away.
Okay, was anyone at the scene calling authorities at that point in time?
Correct.
And who was that?
Ms. Hannah Payne as well as Mr. Robertson.
And Mr. Robinson, were he and Ms. Payne having any exchange of conversation?
Yes.
And what did Mr. Robinson tell Ms. Payne or vice versa?
While Mr. Herring was driving off, he asked Ms. Payne to get the tag, try to get the tag.
Meanwhile, Ms. Payne's on the phone with 911 operator?
Correct.
And what is the 911 operator instructing Ms. Payne to do?
To remain at the scene, do not follow Mr. Herring.
And did the 911 operator say that more than once?
Several times.
And what was the explanation given by the 911 operator
The explanation
of why she should remain at the scene?
It's safer. Should go back to the scene where it's safer and uniform officers are en route.
Okay, did the defendant Payne remain at the scene?
No.
And what occurred after Mr. Herring left the scene? Did Ms. Payne leave the scene or did she remain?
She left the scene as well.
And what was she doing?
She proceeded to chase Mr. Herring westbound on Forest Parkway.
All right, was she still talking to 911 or was she not?
Correct.
What was the reaction of the 911 operator when she realized the defendant Payne was chasing Mr. Herring?
She repeatedly asked Ms. Payne to stop and do not follow Mr. Herring.
Did the defendant Payne obey the 911 operator?
No.
All right, and so what happened at about 6:20 between, if anything, between Payne and Mr. Herring?
Ms. Payne was able to position her vehicle in front of Mr. Herring's vehicle, forcing him to stop.
Okay, so in an English version would be she blocked him.
She blocked him in, yes.
And was he able to progress forward once she blocked him in?
No.
Was he able to retreat or back up and get away from her at that point in time?
No, it was heavy traffic at the intersection of Riverdale Road and Forest Parkway.
So in effect, he was imprisoned, falsely imprisoned.
Correct.
All right, and then were there any people at that intersection that observed what was occurring from when that happened on?
Yes.
And how many people did you or other officers speak to that observed what occurred from this point on?
Total of 4.
And did you talk to them or did others talk to them?
I did speak with 2, and 2 other detectives spoke with the other 2.
And how would you describe the traffic on May 7th at about 6:30 in the evening at that intersection?
It was pretty heavy due to the rush hour traffic, as well as uniform officers were directing traffic at the intersection of 285 on-ramp as well at Riverdale Road.
And do you know why they were directing traffic?
Yes, they was responding to another call that was there where they had to redirect traffic.
Another wreck call?
Correct. So I'm not sure of the nature of the call, but it was something for them to have to redirect traffic.
All right, so what 2 witnesses did you interview that saw what occurred from this point on?
Miss Anita and Mr. Philip Erickson.
And were they in separate vehicles or together?
They were together. They are a married couple.
And so could you visually describe the intersection, or actually, can I get you to, if I give you a piece of paper, could you draw?
Okay, so what we're going to do now, this actually took place, if you could see, 4 years ago. And the female George Zimmerman, Hannah Payne, she ended up leaving the scene when she was told not to leave the scene. Now, it's so much to unpack in this case due to this 4 years, right? And people that don't know, Clayton County is actually a metro of Atlanta. So it's one of the major metros in Atlanta, Georgia. Now, it's so much to unpack. So I will be posting the actual interrogation, but for now, let's talk about the actual hearing that took place today.
So in the case State versus Hannah Renee Payne, case number 2019 CR 01737, court has been informed that you have reached a verdict. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am, we have.
Okay, and are you the foreperson?
Yes, ma'am, I am.
Okay, if you kindly stand. Was your verdict unanimous?
Yes, ma'am.
Has the verdict form been filled in, signed, and dated by you?
Yes, ma'am.
If you would have the bailiff bring the verdict form to me, please. Mr. Foreperson, if you would go ahead and read the verdict.
With regard to count one, as to the offense of malice murder, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. With regard to count two, as to the offense of felony murder, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. With regard to count three, as to the offense of aggravated assault, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. With regard to count four, as the offense of felony murder, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. With regard to count five, as the offense of false imprisonment, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. With regard to count six, as to the offense of possession of firearm during commission of a felony, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. With regard to count seven, as to the offense of possession of firearm during commission of a felony, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. With regard to count eight, as to the offense of possession of firearm during commission of a felony, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Respectfully submitted, the 12th day of December 2023.
Counsels, is there anything further required of this jury before I dismiss them?
If the court should hold the jury.
Okay. I will hold the jury. And so I'm just going to go sequentially and ask you a number of questions to which you will respond. Foreperson, was that your verdict in the jury room?
Yes, ma'am.
Was it freely and voluntarily made by you?
Yes, ma'am.
Is it still your verdict?
Yes, ma'am.
Next person. Was that your verdict in the jury room?
Yes, ma'am.
Was it freely and voluntarily made by you?
Yes, ma'am.
Is it still your verdict?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Was that your verdict in the jury room?
Yes, ma'am.
Was it freely and voluntarily made by you?
Yes, ma'am.
Is it still your verdict?
Yes, ma'am.
Was that your verdict in the jury room?
Yes, ma'am.
Was it freely and voluntarily made by you?
Yes, ma'am.
Is it still your verdict?
Yes, ma'am.
Was that your verdict in the jury room?
Yes, ma'am.
Was it freely and voluntarily made by you?
Yes, ma'am.
Is it still your verdict?
Yes, ma'am.
Was that your verdict in the jury room?
Yes, ma'am.
Was it freely and voluntarily made by you?
Yes, ma'am.
Is it still your verdict?
Yes, ma'am.
Was that your verdict in the jury room? Was it freely and voluntarily made by you?
Yes, ma'am.
Is it still your verdict?
Yes, ma'am.
Was that your verdict in the jury room?
Yes, ma'am.
Was it freely and voluntarily made by you?
Yes, ma'am.
Is it still your verdict?
Yes, ma'am.
Sir? Was that your verdict in the jury room?
Yes, ma'am.
Was it freely and voluntarily made by you?
Yes, ma'am.
Is it still your verdict?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Next. Was that your verdict in the jury room?
Yes, ma'am.
Was it freely and voluntarily made by you?
Yes, ma'am.
Is it still your verdict?
Yes, ma'am.
Was that your verdict in the jury room? Was it freely and voluntarily made by you? Is it still your verdict? Was that your verdict in the jury room?
Yes, ma'am.
Was it freely and voluntarily made by you?
Yes, ma'am.
Is it still your verdict?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I have polled the jurors. Ladies and gentlemen, you have now concluded your service on this jury. You're no longer subject to or bound by the instructions that I've previously given to you about not talking to anyone about this case. You're now free to talk to anyone you like about the case and the decision that your jury has reached. By the same token, you're not required to speak with anyone about this case. That is your decision. However, sometimes the attorneys like to talk with you to ascertain your views about the evidence and input from how they could improve. But again, you're not required to speak to anyone about the case. That is purely your decision. Again, thank you for your service and your commitment to your jury duty this week. You are free to go.
I'll be hanging out over here if they'd like us to.
Right. You'll be outside the
Just over
courtroom?
near the steps.
Okay.
Over the elevator.
You may be seated. Ms. Payne, I'm going to remand you into the custody of the Sheriff's Department at this time.
Okay, so in life, a lot of times there are just no do-overs, right? So let's talk about the sponsor of this video. It's a Surfshock, a comprehensive review of the VPN service. In today's digital age, privacy and security are of utmost importance. With cyber criminals becoming more sophisticated and the government's monitoring online activity, it's essential to take measures to protect your online identity. One way to do so is by using a virtual private network or a VPN service. Among the many VPNs available on the market, Surfshock is one that's been gaining popularity. So don't hesitate to get your own VPN service today. Now, what we want to talk about briefly is actions begot actions. And in a way, I do feel sorry for it, but I feel sorry for the victim in this case. She took his life when she was told to stand down. So it's so much to unpack. So I won't rant and rave. I will be posting a lot of the interrogation on today. So I'm going to end the video and rant on another video. So it will be part 2. This is Antonio with Team Tiggio. Please like, comment, subscribe, as we'll be coming to you more videos in the future. And there will be videos about some of the witnesses as well as the interrogation on this channel. So go ahead and subscribe because we will be posting that information. And once again, we will see you next